I'd like to call together the meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. Jack, could you do a roll call, please?
Mayor Hodges.
Here.
Council President Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Quincy.
Here.
Park Board President Tabb.
Here.
Vice President Becker.
Here.
President Wheeler.
Here. All right. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say yes?
Aye.
Or aye, I should say. Opposed, the same sign? All right. We're officially meeting in a public hearing to take public input on the budget. As some of you are aware, there's been a strong desire to make sure that this public hearing continues not only today, but also for our meeting when we adopt the maximum levy on the 27th of September. So there will be a continuing meeting for that, or I'll entertain a motion and we'll have to vote to do that. And I would also recommend that we meet at 5:05 because the public hearing time is later so that the public has an ability to be here. If somebody is willing to make, yes, Jack?
I suggest that when we, at the end of the public hearing, and you can continue the public hearing to that date at 5:05, that the meeting time start at 4:50, so we can conduct our other business before the public hearing. That's for consideration.
That seems a very good suggestion. So does somebody want to make the motion with Jack's addition? Yes, Council President Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that we continue the public hearing to our meeting of September 27th, and start our regular meeting at 4:50 p.m.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right. Very good. So we're open for public hearing. Do we have people that would like to speak to us?
There's a sign-up list at the roster for people to sign up and step up.
There's no one besides you.
If you'd please let us know your name and your address.
My name is Trina Porty, and my address is 2900 University Avenue Southeast, number 211, Minneapolis.
Welcome.
Good evening, and my statement, because technically this is also a budget hearing for the mayor's budget, my statement addresses page 6 of the mayor's budget letter, the last paragraph regarding PV Plaza funding. I'm speaking because women-headed households are the biggest group experiencing food insecurity and poverty in Minneapolis. Your previous budget spent several millions funding programs to help men. And Minneapolis also supports big corporations, real estate developers, and tourist attractions, including $4 million more for PV Plaza. But that's part of Nicollet Mall, which was already funded. Use that $4 million in support of women-headed households. Or start a Making Sense for Women charge at parking ramps, where 50 cents out of each parking fee goes to a budget line item supporting rent subsidies for women-headed households. Because women are the majority here of workers, parents, taxpayers, and voters. Women are entitled to support, and not only in a baby or beatings pipeline. Women should not have to bear children or be battered to receive support. In the 2016 budget, there were line items exclusively funded, dedicated to funds for men's economic independence, and that needs to be shared equally with women, or you might have a big, expensive lawsuit to pay for instead. Especially considering that what women earn is 54 to 78% of men's pay, you owe equal funding to women. Unless you plan to tax women at the same percentage we're paid, that would work too. There may not be a crowd of people standing with me, but it's still clear that your neglect is sending women to bed hungry tonight and the families that they support. Please correct these inequalities and add a line item to the 2018 budget supporting women heads of households. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any others that would like to speak at this time? Would be my thought that if somebody were to show up in 15 or 20 minutes, that we would give them that opportunity too. Excellent. We've also got some excellent budget overviews information that we're going to be receiving, and I think that'll be helpful for all of us. So we're not going to close the public hearing, as it said. We've already voted to keep that public hearing going. So we have the Parks and Rec Board that is going to be making a presentation to us first. And I must say, I just got back from taking my Labrador Retriever for a nice long walk through Lindale Park Farmstead.
Great, thank you.
And Duncan was most appreciative of all of the parklands that we have.
Well, thank you, Chair Wheeler, appreciate it. And thank you, Commissioners. I am going to have Julie Wiseman walk you through a majority of our presentation tonight, but I will also be here this evening to answer any questions and talk a little bit about where we're at with the neighborhood park plan and reporting out on what we're doing and what we're looking for in 2018.
Thank you so much.
Good evening. I'm Julie Wiseman, the Finance Director for the Minneapolis Park Board. So what we're going to start with is a history of the Park Board's property taxes, local government aid, and other revenues. So for property taxes, the Park Board has increased an average of 4.1% over the past 10 years. You'll see that there's quite a few fluctuations. And then I will point out just a couple. In 2014, we added the tree levy to deal with the infestation of emerald ash borer. And then in 2017, you'll see the increase of the $3 million, which is part of the neighborhood park, 20-year neighborhood park plan, the general fund maintenance portion of that park plan. On local government aid, actions at the state significantly reduced our local government aid. It has begun to rise and stabilized over the last few years, but it's still below the amounts that we used to receive. And then on the other revenues column, we have increased our other revenues, and again, there was a shift in revenues that were revenue-based, that were in the enterprise fund for recreation, that we moved to the general fund. So that's the majority of those increases. So our revenues by major sources, you'll see that for the general fund, we are heavily reliant on property tax funding, with 74% of our revenue coming from that single source. And then 75%, I'm sorry. And then local government aid is 12%. So you'll see that reduction in the red area of the pie chart. And then our fees, fines, and other revenues have increased to compensate. Both property taxes and other revenues were increased to compensate for the loss of local government aid. So on the general fund expenditure side, our Park Board operating costs have increased $19.8 million over the last 10 years. That's 30%. And again, those two items, there's two items, the movement of the recreation-based, fee-based programs back into the general fund was $3.5 million in 2013. So that represents about 5% of that increase over the 10 years. And then again, the $3 million that was increased in 2017 for the neighborhood park plan. Increases in health insurance premiums and pension contribution rates have directly reduced the amount of funding that's available for programs and services. And again, we're showing our history based on our major funding areas, so that you can see in 2017, about 83% of our budget is directly staff related. And then we show health insurance separately and pensions separately, because they take up quite large pieces of our general fund pie. And then we also show utilities and fuel, because that obviously has increased and fluctuated over the years. If we look at our full-time workforce, this is a chart for all funds, so it's not just the general fund, but we think it's important to look at the fluctuation of our workforce over the years. And again, with the decreases in local government aid and the downturn in the economy, you'll see that between the years of 2006 to 2012, we lost 117 full-time employees, or 20% of our workforce. Since 2012, the workforce has been increased by 93 full-time positions, and that includes 45 positions between 2016 to 2017. That's directly related to the 20-year Neighborhood Park Plan funding. So now we're going to look at our budget outlook.
So I'll just touch base a little bit on what, for us, the impacts at the federal and state level. We've, since 2012, have been working directly in DC to get some additional funding, particularly for River First. And we actually, in 2015, were one of only 8 cities in the country to receive the first urban grant through Land and Water Conservation Fund. And actually, construction is beginning in Sheridan Memorial, where that project is going to be done. Also, we had been requested by the EPA to be designated as Urban Water Partnership Community, but given the changes at the federal level, that's been a bit more challenging. But I just actually got an email from the director at EPA yesterday, looking like that may be coming to fruition for us to get some funds for us to be actually designated as an urban waters community. So significant. It's been a challenge. I know you know that in the last several months. At the state legislature, I think we all know the biggest challenge we all faced this year was changes potentially to the pension. And I think we dodged a bullet this year, but as we all know, we're going to have to be back at it for hopefully changes that they want to make in 19 that are not in our favor. And then I just want to touch base a little bit in terms of impacts with the city. We have proposed we have documented here the impact of the $15 minimum wage, the impact on an annual basis for our general fund only. So you can see the impact on an annual basis for each of those and then the total amount. And we have budgeted the 4.1% health increases based on the city's recommendation, and we're showing a 4% tax levy increase through 2022 each year.
So the resolution that the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board of Commissioners passed is recommending a maximum property tax levy be set for the Minneapolis Park Board at 4.1%. It is showing a 4.2% increase for our general fund, which I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide, and then a 1.2% for our tree preservation and reforestation levy, and I have a slide on that one as well. So for our general fund, with the impact of the minimum wage in 2018, we're requesting a 4.2% property tax levy increase rather than the 4% to assist us in covering the impact of those costs. You'll see a slight increase in local government aid, and then some increases in fees, fines, and other revenues, so that we have total revenue projected at $79.5 million. On the expenditure side, we're projecting the full-time and part-time wage and fringe costs are shown there, and then health insurance is shown separately, and again is at the 4% increase, the same as the city is showing. And then our other expenditures. And then down below is the capital levy allocation of $2.5 million that goes into our capital program for our neighborhood parks. So that basically is a balanced budget. There's a slight surplus there. And then going forward, we're showing the 4% property tax levy increase for the next years. On the tree preservation and reforestation projections, This is year 5, 2018 is year 5 of our 8-year program. We are on track and on schedule to meet our goals and begin to phase this out so that you'll see that 2021 will be the last year that we'll be requesting that levy for this program. And again, we program in the use, so if we have money left over from the prior year, we program that in for the next year so that we're not levying additional taxes for that. We use up the fund balance first and then levy for what's remaining. For the capital budget outlook, you have this slide on the PowerPoint, and then you also have a handout packet that has all of the detail. So you have our neighborhood park plan of $10.5 million. So that's the $2.5 million that we used to get as net debt bonding, plus the $8 million that was agreed upon in the concurrent ordinances between the park board and the city council. So that is our funding, net debt bond funding for 2017 and 2018. The neighborhood park capital levy money, that's the money that was identified from the general fund that we support our neighborhood parks. And then we are starting to use the park dedication money as projects are identified, and if there's park dedication money that that has been banked in those areas, that we've started to use that money. The next is the regional parks funding, where we have the various areas that we get for our regional parks. And since the state budget is on a biennium, that's why you see kind of the year where we get money and the year that we don't. And so then in total, at the bottom, we have what we're spending in our neighborhood parks, both on the capital and the rehabilitation side, regional parks, capital and rehabilitation, and then some other projects. And again, this 17.7 million, the detail of what parks and what projects are on tap is in this document that you have before you as well.
And just a couple last things in terms of the CIP that you actually have before you. The back 3 pages of the CIP actually has the ranking for every neighborhood park in the back. So you can see how each park ranked by all each 7 criteria, and they're in order of ranking. And the CIP through 2022 gets us through the first 29 parks that ranked highest based on their race and equity scoring. And those are funded through 2022. We're in the process of developing it for 2023 as well. And you'll also see the funding source for each of the park projects. And you'll notice one of the things that when we did this, I just want to remind you that the board had already adopted a CIP 2016 through 2021. And when we came up with the neighborhood park plan and the criteria-based matrix system, we made a decision to honor the CIP that the board had adopted through 2021 and augment parks that ranked high on the race and equity score, so they're getting additional money. So you'll see parks that through 2021 that have some old CIP money and new money through MPP 20. And those are the parks that ranked highest. So it's parks 1 through 29 that are getting additional money. Starting in 2022 and every year going forward, the entire CIP will be based solely on the ranking system that we're using for NPP 20. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that. And then one of the requirements of the ordinance is that I report out the use of those funds, how we're using them, what we're doing the future years. We're actually in the process right now. Since this is our first year, we are in the process of creating a report, and I will actually have a report in October that I will not only provide to this body, I will provide it to the council and our board as well, so you can see what we're doing. And we will do an annual report just on MPP 20 alone, so that we will document both rehab and capital, which is required in the ordinance. But in addition to that, we will also be reporting on our maintenance activities, even though that's not part of the ordinance requirements. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Ms. Becker?
Ms. Miller, parkway maintenance. I'm not seeing much funding in here for parkway maintenance. I'm seeing like $162,000 for 5 years on parkways. Can you tell us the status of parkways? Or if not off the top of your head, would you be willing to come back and do a presentation on parkway?
Well, I'm actually happy to talk to you about the parkways. It's been a major conversation piece with myself and the board. As I think you know, as Julie mentioned, we provide all of the street funding, all of the funding for street and park trees throughout the entire city, the park board does. And we obviously have the additional levy that we have added to address emerald ash borer and tree loss as a result of storm. And it's been a concern of mine that the board has, in the last few years, contributed substantial amount to the parkway system because the city has not been able to fund streets well enough. It was my hope that through the additional funding for streets that parkways would be included in there. They were not. But I am trying to work through that at a staff level with the Public Works Director. And nothing has been solidified yet to this date. But you'll notice that there is no funding beyond this year for parkways.
Correct.
Because it is our belief that we are responsible for trees and the city is responsible to provide for the streets. And so it is our hope that the city will provide the adequate funding for parkway maintenance and rehabilitation and reconstruction.
Do you have an estimate of when you might have those conversations done and we could both have the park board and the public works director come back to our committee and speak about this?
I am actually in conversations with the president of the board. I don't know if Commissioner Tabb, if you want to talk about that at all, but I'm in conversations with the board president right now, and I'm actually collecting some data for her. So I'm hoping that within the next couple of weeks.
I think so too. I maybe in about a month or so we could have it come back and talk about that in general, sort of where we are, what kind of agreement we've come to, and sort of how we move forward from there. Because again, we don't know whether we will get the additional monies needed for the parkways, and I do think that's a very important part of the service redesign that was done many years ago, and I think we've really we've kept up our end of the bargain, and we just want to make sure that the street part is also continues to be a part of that.
Put a request into Mr. Qualley that that be put on a future agenda.
So noted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And perhaps this is a question for, I hope somebody here can handle this. There's been a proposal at the city level to change the franchise fee for utilities, to increase it by 0.5%. And in looking at your budget pie chart, you're 4.7% or something like that in utilities and fuel. So I'm just curious, are governments subject to the franchise fee? Mr. Ruff, do you know that? Do you not know? Okay, we're going to have to figure this out.
Actually,
Okay.
Council President Johnson, it's a really good question. It's not something that we have factored into our budget.
Okay.
So I think
And I don't know
it's
that's figured
important.
into our budget either.
I know, it's
so.
important for us to
Okay.
understand that.
All right.
Okay,
All right. I want to know the number for us and for
Yes.
the park board. Thank you.
all right, thank you.
Further questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had a question. I'm not a specific line item in the budget. That's not the purview of the board here. But where we say the adopted budget in the general fund for 2017.
Councilmember Quincy, can you tell me what you're
Sure.
looking at?
I was just looking at, page 17, actually.
Page 17? There we go, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was wondering if that adopted budget, that number, does not include the $3 million that was added in 17?
It
So-
does, it does include it.
Oh, so it includes that. So it's not
17
the
is the-
adopted?
That's right, the 17
adopted
budget
plus.
includes the 3 million.
Okay, so everything going forward is on a continuing service level once that 3 million was added to the levy base?
That is correct.
Okay, just wanted
That
to
is
make sure
correct.
that was captured there. Thank you.
Yes.
Good questions. Are there more? Jack?
I think it's important to realize that resolutions adopted by the park board are consistent with the mayor's recommendations with regards to the levies.
Thank you. Yes. Julie, do you have a?
Sorry. Yep, I forgot just to mention my last slide here. So the superintendent will present her recommended budget to the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board on October 18th. This is the link to our park board website where all of the budget information is located. So we had a board budget retreat back in May. All the information that we shared with our commissioners back in May is posted on there. So that's the location that citizens could go to learn more about the Minneapolis Park Board's budget and finances.
Yes. Richard Ham.
Thank you.
President. Well, you have several types.
Whatever, yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Once again, I just really want to thank the mayor and city council for working with us to come up with the 20-year neighborhood parks plan. I think it's really been a great addition for our neighborhood parks who have a lot of difficulty, where we have a lot of difficulty funding the needs in those parks. And so, again, I think, we just went over a lot of information really quickly. So it's very difficult to absorb what it is that we saw. But our ability to put money into these parks really makes a difference to all of the residents in this city. And I'm just really glad that we sort of have stepped up and sort of put our money where our mouth is. And I thank very much Carol Becker for recognizing that this was an issue and sort of saying, well, gosh, it's interesting that we haven't really added any money for capital programs to parks over the last however many years I've been on this
Eight.
yeah, on this, on this body. So again, I think there's a lot of credit that goes around to people, and it's been a struggle for us to get up to speed to be able to do all these things. And our staff really continues to work very, very hard to make these things happen. And we're sort of still in that mode. But again, a lot of credit to a lot of people for stepping up and doing the right thing.
Thank you very much. Yes. Okay,
Actually,
let's-
one thing I wanted to point out is that we are the first park system in the entire country that's entire CIP will be based on race and economic equity in terms of what's going to be proposed as part of our 2018 budget, that no other system in the country is doing the work that we're doing around race and equity. And our entire CIP will be based on a criteria-based matrix system on race and economic equity. So it's an important thing for you to know that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Becker, did you have a?
I just wanted to support Park Board President Tabb's comments. It's really exciting to see these things start to happen. And I'm really, really looking forward to being able to drive around the city and look at our parks get better. Just fundamentally look better, be better, support our community better. And I look forward to the work that you're going to be doing. Hurry up, get it done. I'm really excited. Thank you.
When we were at the GFOA conference, I had the opportunity to visit with people from all over the country. That's what happens at those gatherings. And they were just sort of blown away that we had a 20-year plan for our parks, for our streets. a lot of credit goes to people who are sitting up here, but a lot more credit goes to those who are sitting out there to make sure that this has been able to happen. And we are really fortunate to have the kind of leadership that we have. Not the elected leadership. They're okay. All right. I'm talking about the kind of leadership of the people that are doing stuff day in and day out. And I am deeply grateful to live in this great city. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We have another presentation, which will be equally fun, I'm sure. Mr. Ruck.
Mr. Chair, members of the Board of Estimate and Taxation, I am Mark Ruff, the city's Chief Financial Officer. Pleased to be in front of you this evening to discuss the city's budget as was presented by the mayor on August 15th. And we all enjoyed her speech yesterday in terms of giving us an overview of themes and details that we will try to add some numbers to in much greater detail. I have a bunch of slides, over 50, so I'm going to race through them and just count on you as the board to slow me down at times that you would like more clarification. And certainly if you ask questions such as the council president just asked, and if I don't know the answer, we will quickly get the answers to you in any means possible. So that's the purpose of this process, is to really, from a public standpoint, kick off the budget discussion, and we certainly look forward to more discussion with the board and with the budget subcommittee and the full city council eventually later this fall. You've seen this chart before. It was in the mayor's letter from August 15th. It hasn't changed. This is an overall city. When we include every levy that falls within the city's taxation line items, there's more than one line item that the city has within an individual business or residence's tax bill, but this includes all of our debt operating as well as the park board requested levy that was just outlined by the park board officials. This is a total dollar amount change of all the levy of just over $17 million and a 5.5% levy increase from 2017. If we step back and look at the whole city budget, and as has been the tradition in the past, the park board does post all of their budget information on their own website it has been in the past tradition even well before I was here. Our preliminary budgets exclude independent boards. So this is city, and it includes not just the general fund, but all expenditures of the city. And so you can see in terms of the different revenue sources that the city enjoys, the charges for services being the largest, and that being because we provide sewer, water, stormwater utilities, and that's where majority of the charges of services come from. But there are certainly a variety of revenue sources that the city enjoys in terms of a relatively balanced and not overly dependent on one revenue source, which is healthy for the city as a whole.
A quick question. I see the federal government contribution is 2%. Has there been a change in that in the last few years?
Mr. Chair, sure. I think we've seen a steady decline in federal grants, and much lower than it has been historically. So yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. That was my impression, but thanks for confirming it.
Sure. Expenditures, we are 25% salary and wages, along with fringe benefits, another 10%. Capital is 19%. Debt service, which I think is an important benchmark to look at, is 11% of our budget, and certainly that is lower than average for the size of our city as well. Certainly, I know of cities that spend as much as 20 or 25% of their total budget on debt service. So just like your own personal income, that's an important measure to keep long term. When we talk about different departments as the city is broken up, certainly public works has a quarter of our expenditures, and again, because of those enterprise funds. The second then is police at 13% of our total budget. But again, capital is a significant part. The city is reinvesting itself.
We have a question from Ms. Becker.
Quick question on the last slide. It says the capital category includes capital improvements in the city's capital program as well as capital expenditures associated with the CARS program? What is the CARS program?
Sure. The CARS program is a program that was started about 4 years ago, and that was an effort of saying that if there are dollars that are above the minimum fund balance of the city, that smaller departments in particular have a hard time within their own budgets to afford equipment enhancements, IT enhancements, and so there is essentially a capital request system. That's what CARS stands for, is Capital Assets Request System. So it is not an ongoing part of the CIP. It is if we have enough money left over at the end of 1 year, we will fund this request, and we always get a huge number of requests compared to what we were actually able to fund. And I'll talk about the funding at the very end about that program.
Thank you.
So oftentimes we get the question of we talk about percentage increases, but what does that mean for dollars? So overall, the spending level increases, including all enterprise funds, special revenue funds, city general fund of $82.5 million. Okay. The general fund at a normalized comparison from 17 to 18 is $34.3 million. You can see how we've broken those expenditure levels out to demonstrate how much of that is current service level versus change items. And the change items described below relate to specific items within the mayor's recommended budget, ongoing funding and one-time funding. We have this little party going on in February here in Minneapolis, and that's known as the Super Bowl. And as you are aware, the city is being reimbursed by the host committee for a number of city services that are extraordinary costs. That's just under $5 million, general fund portion of that $3.4 million. And so if we net out the Super Bowl cost, it's 5.1 of ongoing and 8.5 million, that difference to the 11.9 and the 3.4 of one-time expenditures. The number of positions increasing citywide across all funds is 40, and there is in the budget book a description by essentially department as to what those personnel changes are as well. Historically, just as it was demonstrated by the Park Board, this is where we are getting close then to kind of pre-recession employment levels for the city as well for 2018. I'm always sensitive to people who don't have deep degrees in accounting like myself. I do not have a degree in accounting. So I don't want to use terms that are not clear. And so I think we also, though, as a city, have to live by certain accounting standards. And we have these different types of funds. And so most of the attention on these discussions, because it does focus on property taxes, is the general fund, but certainly a major part of our work as a city are our business operations and our enterprise funds. As I mentioned, those are the utilities and also parking. And we have assorted some smaller enterprise funds as well. Special revenue funds, those that are not self-supporting but are not regular city business, includes the convention center and the target center primarily. And then we have internal service funds where we are essentially hiring ourselves for services, and then capital. So I'm going to walk through each one of these. So as was described earlier, the mayor's recommended budget does fully fund what is the plan in the ordinance for the Parks and Streets Agreement arrived in 2016. That is a 0.7 out of the 5.5. So in other words, if the Parks and Streets Agreement didn't occur, it would be a 4.8% increase in the levy. If you recall, as a part of that agreement, it was built in that for at least 12 to 15 years, we're going to be annually increasing the levy by approximately 0.6 or 0.7% to help pay for the costs primarily associated with debt service for that agreement. Some of the operating costs were initially raised. So, for example, the additional $3 million to the Park Board was raised in 1 year, but the rest of the capital is raised over a longer period of time. So it built into essentially current service level that increase. The mayor mentioned in her speech yesterday emphasis on public safety. We organized this presentation by departments, and so this slide is an effort to help demonstrate some of these public safety change items that were requested by departments and that the mayor included, along with requests from the public, from council members, and from the mayor herself. So I'm going to go through in more detail, but just in terms of the thematic issues on this particular budget, certainly public safety is a major one, and that term is very broadly used in terms of including regulatory services, city attorney, and not just police and fire. We're going to discuss a little bit more about climate change, and those efforts are primarily within the coordinator's office and within our health department, as well as its affordable housing and displacement programs, which is our community planning and economic development department we call CPED, but also there is an increase to our public housing authority for some security costs that they requested as well. An important factor in terms of our equity efforts internally for the city is to build pathways for newer employees and people who may not follow a traditional educational path. And so there are a number of programs here to try to increase our percentage of our workforce that is both women and people of color. Certainly the issues in terms of transparency that the mayor highlighted are included in our city clerk's work. I would just say a compliment to City Clerk Casey Carl. He and his staff worked very hard over the last several days to really make our website much more user-friendly for the budget. And so if you haven't visited our new budget webpage for the city, I would encourage you to do so. It works well on mobile devices as well as PCs and Apple computers. So thanks to our IT department and Casey and certainly our budget staff. I neglected also to introduce to you, for those of you who haven't met, our newest budget director, Micah Intermill, has been on the job less than 5 months. He's exceeded our expectations in terms of the work he's been doing. Just very happy with Micah's arrival, and seated next to him is our deputy CFO, Lori Johnson, who has also been very deeply involved in the budget process. And behind the two of them is Mike Gablin, a familiar face to you all, who handles our capital budget and our capital and long-range investment committee work, which I think all of us know how much time CLIC puts into reviewing all of the capital items. So thank you all for allowing me to recognize the staff that we have that do great work within the city. Also within a theme here is, I would say, a concern as a CFO for the city that I have over the long term is just how much we rely on information technology to operate today, and the demands that puts upon our budget longer term. In other words, we are certainly in an environment and an economic situation where software companies are doing a great job of providing service to us, but they're also, in some ways, become a necessary, I'm going to use this term, which is not fair, but a necessary evil in terms of us actually being able to operate efficiently. In the sense that once we are captured within their system, then it's very hard to escape out of that, or it's very expensive to escape out of that, right? And our IT department does a great job of maintaining requests and maintaining our systems and maintaining security. I think we're very happy with the work they do. I would just highlight that what I've seen in the last 6 months is this is going to be an ongoing effort for us in the city to not only get what we've started in the past done right in the next year or two, but also just think about how we handle the governance process of how we make IT expenditures. And as I mentioned, CLIC is a very well-organized capital review process, right? But we have a rather haphazard review process internally here for software. And because that world changes so quickly, it is a challenge for all of us to keep up on it, but it's essential to providing good service as well. So I just lay that out there as one of the issues that I think is recognized in the mayor's recommended budget, and one that will not just be taken care of in one budget, but we are just working hard at the process side of this. And then again, as the Board of Estimate and Taxation, in terms of looking at pressures upon city budgets, that's not just us, that's all across the country and the world that's a pressure. I would also say that we have some strategic cuts and cost containment within this budget, and one of those is related to IT expenditures. IT and the fleet internal service costs were higher than what we had anticipated in the long-term financial forecast, and so we are cutting their budget in terms of reducing it, but we are scaling back their request as partly a signal here to say we need to think hard about how we're spending some money. The last thing is not a major budget item that I want to also make sure that the board is aware of is that the city is moving to self-insurance for our medical coverage next year. There was a great deal of discussion earlier this year. You're not going to see any big changes in the numbers, but certainly Lori Johnson has spearheaded that from our department standpoint. And we will just, again, I would ask you to keep track of that. That'll be a separate fund. It'll be a separate accounting in our comprehensive financial statement, but it is a big deal for the city to take this on, but we're very confident that it'll be a benefit for our workers and our city budgets longer term. So I'm going to move to the general fund because that's the one that gets most of the attention here. I will say that you see a decrease in general fund revenues, which on an initial basis would concern me if I were in your situation, but we are not actually getting less money than we did previously. One of the structures that we're changing here is how we account for our sales tax. And so you can see on the third line down, the sales tax goes from 82 million down to 0. And that's not because we've lost sales tax. It's because we are readjusting into what we call the downtown assets program. Sales tax going into special revenue fund first. And then you can see down on the bottom, the transfers in number goes up significantly. We have $30.6 million transferred from that special revenue fund into the general fund. So when I discussed earlier about normalizing the general fund comparison from one year to another, we are excluding all of those accounting adjustments and just comparing one year from another earlier. But I will talk a little bit more about the downtown assets and why we see that as a very much a benefit for the enterprise longer term. I would say that if you look at some of these other revenue sources, we oftentimes, again, as I said, focus on property taxes, but certainly significant other revenue sources. LGA, local government aid for the city is up just over $1 million. We certainly appreciate the state government's and the governor's help in us achieving an increase, but it's still not keeping up with inflation, so that puts pressure on our other revenue sources. We can see the other charges for services. In some of those are mostly internal charges, another important category, but license and permits only going up 1.5% again puts pressure on property taxes because our other revenue sources in many cases is not keeping up with inflation. The franchise fees we'll have a discussion about a little bit later. So the general fund revenue category, just the same chart, just showing you in a graphical form. Again, property taxes being 40% is a healthy number for a general fund.
We have a question from Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ruff, back to the general fund revenue by category. So this last year in 17, we used 5.5 fund balance. And this year we're going up to 17.3. How do we make that calculation about that's how much we should use?
So that, Mr. Chair, Council President Johnson, this is a budgeted number from 5.5 to 17.3. So I think I would say that there are a couple of factors that are enabling us to use more fund balance this year. One is that we have a greater amount of sales tax left over than we had in previous years is one factor, and I'm looking for Mr. Intermill to help me on some of the details. And the second is that by having an adjustment in the total amount of the general fund and the size of the revenues, we have a general fund minimum balance of 17% of our general fund. Because our general fund revenues are shrinking a little bit because of the move over to the special revenue fund, it allows us to free up more revenues for one-time expenditures out of the general fund balance. So those are the two main areas that I would say are the sources of the general fund one-time uses.
Thanks.
Vice President Becker has a question.
Does that then mean that the balance minimums for the special revenue funds are lower than for the general fund?
Mr. Chair, Member Becker, the answer is no. The primary source of some of the general or the special revenue fund balance has been the convention center, which actually has a fairly healthy cash balance in it. So, we are not endangering the health of the city by playing a shell game in terms of avoiding having enough funds in reserve. I think that's not the case for the downtown assets or the convention center fund as well.
Thank you.
And certainly on the sources of the use of fund balance, I will follow up with the Council President and get her a detailed line item of all of the different sources for that as well, so we can.
Yeah, if you could make that available to all of us, that'd be helpful.
Will do.
If you could, make sure we all get a copy, that would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we certainly will. Just to highlight too, in terms of, there's nothing special about 2002 other than just it's a good comparison year before the state local government aid cuts started in earnest. And you can see that 41% of our general fund in the blue at the bottom used to be local government aid. We are now down to 15%. Good news is we're up from 14% last year. But you can see that property taxes are becoming a larger and larger part of our budget as those other revenue sources are being adjusted down. Franchise fee overview. Council President asked a great question, which I'm embarrassed to say I've read the franchise fee agreements, and it says nothing about public entities being excluded, but I don't know statutorily whether they're excluded. So that's a question we will follow up on. But franchise fees have been around the city for a long time. This is not a new thing, and it is also franchise fees are charged by dozens of cities around the state. So this is a common way of diversifying revenue sources and helping to offset property tax increases. Now, we have $33.5 million in the 2008 budget. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Vice President Becker has a question.
How much would property taxes be going up if we did not raise this through franchise fees? Roughly speaking.
Well, if all of franchise fees went away, roughly you'd have a 10% increase in property taxes.
But for the 0.5%, I don't know what the current rates are for
Right.
to know what a 0.5% is. 0.5% a 10% increase, a 20% increase, a 5% increase.
Mr. Chair, if I get through this part of the presentation, if I haven't answered your question, then please ask it again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So there are 3 different types of franchise fees we have. We have electric, gas, and cable. And so in this context, we're going to talk about it. We're not discussing any proposed increases to cable franchise fees. And in fact, the uses of that are a little more restricted in some cases. Electric and gas, we're talking a 0.5% rate adjustment. And just as a background, in Minneapolis, the choice that was made a number of years ago was to charge franchise fees as a percentage of essentially the bill. Other cities just charge a flat amount, $4 a month or $7 a month, but ours actually goes up and down. And you will find that if you look historically, because primarily the CenterPoint utility is natural gas, which depends on how cold a winter we have. You will see some of those revenues tend to be up and down for the city as well. This is pursuant to an ordinance and as well as a franchise agreement. The ordinance does require a 90-day period after a new ordinance is in place before the billing goes into effect. So the $2.9 million would be that 0.5% increase. That's just a little bit less than 1% of a property tax levy, to answer Ms. Becker's question. For 2018, the mayor's recommended budget contemplates approximately $2.2 million because there's an implementation period, which we weren't sure if January 1, this new rate, if council chooses to move forward with it, would be in place. And so we just assumed that the first quarter would be the implementation period. So that for 2018, it'd be $2.2 million, and then in 2019, it'd be $2.9 million. Again, that's an estimate because it's based on what the usage is of electricity and gas. It's not a fixed amount. This was endorsed by the Clean Energy Partnership Board at the last meeting, and there are different fee classes depending on the type of property. Residential right now is a 4.5%, and this is charged monthly on just directly to the utility companies, and then they turn around and pay us monthly as well. Commercial, and there are details in the franchise agreement now about the definitions of commercial and the amount of kilowatt hours that it uses, but that right now is at 5%, will go up to 5.5%, and then industrial is 3% and go up to 3.5%. So it's not a 0.5% increase like we're talking about the levy increasing by 0.5. It is a rate adjustment, again, more like a sales tax going up by 0.5%. Okay, so just that naming is important. What does that mean? So these charts come out of an advisory group to the Clean Energy Partnership. It's the Energy Vision Advisory Committee. So that group did put together a report for the Clean Energy Partnership, and these are their estimates together with Excel and CenterPoint staff reviewed those estimates as well. So these are the totals for residential, your average commercial, and your average industrial property. And so then the top chart then is just the incremental amount, and the bottom chart is what then is the estimate of the total franchise fee charge after the increase by those different types of property. Included also by EVAC is just a comparison to other cities. This is not a full list of cities, it's just those that are similar and nearby to us as well that have franchise fees, and you can see what it means just for the residential piece of property for that fee.
If my math is good, it's about $7 a year for a residential increase. Is that right?
Sure.
It's
Okay.
a month.
Yep.
$7 a month or $7
No,
a year?
$7 a year. The increase would be $7 a year.
Yep.
That's, I just was doing some quick math here without a calculator. Thank you.
All right, so again, the main part of the, I'm going to move quickly into the change items that are listed in the general fund and just give some more detail. Again, these are listed not thematically, but by department. Okay? And each department will be making a presentation to the budget subcommittee, and so I'm going to allow them to go into more detail. But certainly, if you have specific questions among the four of us as staff, we'll do our best to answer the questions that you have about these specific requests. But certainly within the attorney's office, one of the major requests I'm going to highlight is the second one in terms of pre-charge review team. So this was a high priority for Susan Siegel in terms of being able to really move through all of the pre-charge backlog that exists within her office. City clerk, we've talked about the centralized data processing and the data review. The fire department is a part of, again, both a pathways program and as their way of enhancing our complement to our healthcare system, and in particular our ambulance system is this mobile healthcare provider of 4 FTEs. The chief is very excited about this program, and we are as well. City coordinator is where most of the franchise fee proposal would go through, and I want to make it clear that $1.4 million of the franchise fee amount has not been specifically allocated to a specific program. In other words, part of the Clean Energy Partnership is a process of going through and trying to prioritize what are those energy conservation and energy programs that can be supported by this money, and it's a collaborative process that's anticipated with that money. We do have some of that money, and it could be upwards to $300,000 to help supply funding for the city to go to 100% renewable electricity over the next several years. And so that is a component of that $1.4 million, but then again, it's about $375,000. Part of that depends on how much is allocated to enterprise funds versus general fund. All right. There are new FTEs within the city coordinator for strategic planning and continuous improvement efforts, as well as a community initiatives coordinator, and some money out of the franchise fee to help provide ongoing funding for the sustainability activities. Within finance and property services, part of a pathways program for us is actually to attract more accountants directly out of college, and we're focusing this on a program that Ramsey County has actually started to work with recent accounting graduates and try to encourage them to be looking at a public career, and they've had great success at Ramsey County with their approach, and we hope to emulate that, as well as moving toward doing some more investments ourselves internally and using a Bloomberg terminal for that, which is the industry standard for that type of work. Civil rights within another FTE within police conduct review, as well as outreach associated with the minimum wage and the labor standards enforcement. We do have a transfer to civil rights from civil rights to NCR for the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs within the general fund.
Ms. Becker has a question.
I'm sorry, I didn't ask quickly enough. Banking Alternatives Equity Partnership under finance? All right, mine does not look like that.
So I
Mine
think
says-
you are ahead on the presentation, Ms.
Oh,
Becker.
I apologize.
Yep. So that does come later under the one-time expenses rather than
Oh,
the
I'm
ongoing.
sorry, I apologize.
So we typically, just for those of you not familiar with the budget process, when we say ongoing, it's that funding that is built in so that every year we anticipate there's going to be money. There's also the one-time expenditures, which are just those that may have a life only of 1 year and then would go away. So I'll talk about that in a minute.
I apologize.
Don't worry. The Health Department has several additional expenditures. Again, highlighting the pollution reduction and the residential energy benchmarking. These are going to be ongoing programs and supported by the franchise fee as well. And the Health Department is going through some succession planning as well for an FTE. Human Resources, we are, Mr. Giles is in his last months here of retirement and has retired officially, but in his last months of part-time work for the city. And we have $130,000 for an enhancement for our labor relations program within that department. We're continuing a collaborative state safety strategies program within NCR, and this is ongoing funding rather than one time. And then police, great deal of enhancements based on the request from our new chief. And as the mayor mentioned, there is an additional funding for one sworn officer as well as 2 sworn officers being taken from grant funding to general funds. So really 3 additional expenditures for the general fund FTA basis. Public Works has an enhancement in terms of comprehensive safety program, as well as TPP and some stormwater management work that they're doing. We do have a request and was funded FTE for inspections of essentially our new apartment buildings that are being built around the city. And then significant investment in nighttime mobility to try to help, as the mayor alluded to, in terms of the downtown traffic, both associated around Hennepin Avenue and then a larger part of downtown. Also, then if we move out of the ongoing funding then to the one-time expenditures, you will see that we have detailed out all of the Super Bowl expenditures that are reimbursable, but it is part of our budget, and so we're including that. Okay. I'm not going to go over any great detail here unless there is specific questions that you have. So this is the page with a question about the Banking Alternatives Equity Partnership. I think if there's any discussion that Micah you want to add, or certainly if the mayor wants to add, but this is largely coming out of the community that says there are alternatives and access for banking that are concerns for the community. This is not related necessarily to a municipal bank, which has been discussed before. It is really more about how do we have fairness within access for banking services within particularly communities of color.
Would this be changes in how the city is handling its own banking?
No.
This would be banking within the community, but not the city organization's banking.
Correct. It is more of a study and a facilitation. It is not necessarily any staff members.
Mayor Hodges.
There's a community-based organization that is looking at creating more banking equity, particularly on the north side, and this would go to support that.
Thank you.
Is there a reason that this is not in CPED and it is in the finance department? I guess that's part of what's confusing to me.
Well, I mean, I think when we talk about where does the expertise lie in terms of what would be access for banking services, I think the decision was made to move that into finance. We do everything in partnership within departments, and so where necessarily the funding goes is not always the most important part.
Thank you.
All right, the list of other ones.
Well, yeah, excuse me, President Johnson.
Mr. Chair, I just had a question for the mayor. When you talk about this Northside banking, are you speaking of the credit union that people are trying to?
Yeah, speak up.
I'm sorry. When you're talking about the Northside Banking Initiative, are you talking about the credit union that people are trying to organize, or is it something else?
Mr. Chair, Madam Councilmember, there is, it's no longer a credit union, but yes, the initiative that's happening on the north side to create more in the community.
Okay, all right. Just curious. I've read a little bit about it, but I haven't. That's great. Thank you.
Part of fire in terms of their enhancements would also be then EMS vehicles to go along with this new program that they have we described earlier. And then several, again, health department related. One of those is the ELMS, the enterprise land management configuration, is the software that I described earlier as well. There is additional collaborative safety strategy money then one time for NCR to complement their ongoing money. And and then additional money for the police department, the major, which is the overtime for the Super Bowl being reimbursed by the host committee. And a significant investment then in the source of funding from the self-insurance fund for the body cameras. So with that, if there are no other questions on those particular items, again, the experts of this are the departments themselves, and we will have the budget subcommittee that will review that. Budget cuts are highlighted here in terms of by department. The bottom one, the Public Works, Traffic, and Parking Services, is a kind of cut that we all like to see, which is the city's been investing in LED lighting. And so the electricity budget that's been within the Public Works Department is going to be repurposed because they're not going to have to spend that money on electricity anymore because of the great savings associated with LED lighting. Okay. Property tax is an important part of the discussion with the BET. Again, this is just graphically looking to see where the city's levies used. So I want to talk about a couple of highlights within the property tax. One is that the levies are stable for the closed pension funds. As the superintendent mentioned, we have some longer term concerns about the legislature, and we'll still certainly work to make sure that our pension aid is maintained, but at least for 2 years that aid is constant. You will notice that at the very bottom of our levy chart, there was an increase in our library debt service payment. It goes from $9.3 million up to $10.3 million. The reason for that, and it was repurposing a capital levy, was that the state of Minnesota had passed library aid a number of years ago for the city, and it's a formula, and some of you have looked at this formula, and the state had interpreted the formula, which initially we didn't agree with, but ultimately the state prevailed, to be the aid is 40% of our levy. So the only way we can get more aid is to increase our levy. And so the state did put that into our biennium. And so we added, just essentially shifted one of our levies from another place to increase to the library. And the advantage to us is $400,000 more in state aid, and we pay the bonds off faster. So our argument to the state was we both win because you are going to have less aid over a longer period of time when we pay less interest. Okay?
That's good.
That's really positive stuff.
Well, I think certainly Mr. Qualley and Mr. Ablin, when I first started, they made sure that I knew this was a priority for several of you on the Board of Estimate and Taxation, because I know it's been a topic of discussion in the past. So. Okay. City property tax levy history here, again, just being able to show graphically what the increase has been over a long period of time. Value changes. So we are seeing increased values within the city, which is a good thing. Industrial, you can see, actually dropped, which certainly is a concern for the city. But apartments continue to be a very strong increase, and this is not just inflation alone; it is both new construction and inflation on values in this particular chart. Single family, we are actually now at a point where we are higher than we are pre-recession on the median single family value at $225,500. Okay. Spent a few minutes. This was the same chart that was in the letter from August 15th. When people say, well, what does a 5% levy increase mean for me? And I think the answer is that we are looking at, obviously depends on what your increase in value is going to be, but if we look at approximately an average increase across the city of residential property, and that's not including apartments, but it includes duplexes, triplexes, condos. We're looking at, for right around that median value, about $81 a year increase. If you have a homestead piece of property, $61 if it's a lower value, and $110 if it's a higher value. You look on the right and you say, why is the lower value going up faster than the higher valued? And that's a function of this market value exclusion program from the state, which you get more of your value taxed as your value increases. Okay? But you still pay less than somebody who's non-homestead. Apartments, again, if you take out the new construction, it's about a 9% increase in value, which is a 6.5% increase in taxes, and commercial is a little lower increase overall, about 7.8%, and again, that's about a 5.3. These are very preliminary numbers. We will continue to refine them as we get more numbers from the county. Largely, we are just on a very basic market value level, just 9% on a preliminary basis. We're hopeful that number is going to go up, could be closer to 10% by the time that county finalizes all the numbers. We've talked about this feels like then, so if we talk about if my value is going up by some percent, or what is the amount of properties around that will actually incur an increase, and how is that all divided out? So we've tried to graphically demonstrate this at a very basic level. What the feels like is depends on the type of property you are, depends on 1 year in terms of how much our TIF values go up versus property outside of TIF districts. The fiscal disparities program that we discussed earlier this year, I should say, impacts this. But at a basic level for 2018, if we exclude the very small parcels, okay, so there's a lot of parcels that are less than 30,000 in value. In fact, out of about 131,000 parcels in the city that are residential, about 16,000 are less than 30,000. So if we exclude those and we exclude all the parcels that have some kind of new construction value associated with them, then right around 18% of the parcels will not see a tax increase. Okay? So graphically, what does that look like? Again, you can see what the increases and the changes in property taxes will be, and these percentages on top is the percentage of the totals, and the percentage at the bottom would be the change in property taxes. So we, at the very right side, we see 2% of our total of our residential properties will go up in property taxes by more than 20%. And again, that's all a function of what your value is doing as your individual home. Okay. The median is closer to 6%, as we mentioned earlier.
Does this mean like roughly a third of these,
Ms. Becker, go ahead.
roughly a third of these properties are going to see a 10% or higher tax increase? I mean, am I reading the chart right?
So
in round numbers?
You're quicker on math than I am in terms of that demarcation, but if you add up everything from 10% to the right and it comes up to be 33%, then you would be accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Enterprise funds, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's not relevant directly to the BET, but I just want you to know that a factor also in addition to the property taxes is we do pay attention to what utility bills are going to be doing over a period of time. So some of these demonstrate in terms of this particular is the parking fund. And while we don't see any changes directly in rates in this particular slide, I want you to know that the transfers from the parking fund continue to be an important part of the general fund revenues, $7 million for 2017, and then it'll be the same in 18. And then Target Center still will be receiving $4.2 million of transfer from the parking fund. When we look at overall budget comparisons, you can see that there's great variety in terms of the increases in the utility fee, expenses. I would just mention that sanitary sewer is largely the function of what the Met Council charges us, and so we have less control over that particular area. I'm going to walk through it in terms of get to the slide that probably most people care the most about, which is this slide, which is if we add up all of the utility fees on a monthly basis, what do we expect that change to be? Well, at 4.4%, when you add them all up and adjust for the size of the bill, it's $4.20 increase per month on an average bill of just under $100 per month. I do want to just talk briefly about this downtown assets idea because it is important as overall the function of the city. They have these significant assets that fall outside of the general fund, and that's the Convention Center, Target Center, the Commons, and then TV Plaza. And there is a proposal to then fund PV Plaza's capital at $4 million, as was mentioned by earlier by the speaker, first speaker this evening. There's also on a one-time basis operational support, no capital dollars, but for the Commons of $750,000. This is being funded largely by sales and entertainment taxes. And I think since I've been at the city, there's been some confusion about exactly how much money is support from the sales and entertainment taxes are supporting our stadia, how much is supporting the general fund. And I think one of the benefits of this accounting change is it clearly delineates how much money we're getting for the general fund out of sales and entertainment taxes. And in 2018, it's proposed at $30.6 million. So a substantial portion of that, of the sales and entertainment taxes, go directly to help support services in the city. The other things that those dollars will be used for, Mr. Chair. Yes.
Ms. Becker?
Okay, go ahead, finish on.
Sure.
Question.
Other thing that is important to note that we have our first year full debt service payments for our renovation of the Target Center, and that's $5.7 million this year as well.
Yes.
We have this idea of these downtown assets. Will we still be accounting for each of one of them individually and separately? So we'll be able to see what revenues are coming in and out for each of those different facilities, and also the utilization of the sales tax, which in particular is an issue because it's fungible with the general fund?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Becker, the answer is yes. And in fact, if you go in the budget book, you will see financial plans which show history and then how this is changing going forward for those, and projections for the Convention Center and the Target Center, which have traditionally had a financial plan. The PV Plaza and the Commons will be wrapped into it's smaller dollar amounts and will be wrapped into the Downtown Assets Fund.
The downtown,
Downtown Assets Fund, which is the umbrella fund for that. So those in particular won't be detailed out as greatly in the budget document, but certainly Convention Center and Target Center will be detailed out more greatly.
but will I be able to then track where revenues are going to those other assets?
That is our intent, Mr. Chair and Ms. Becker.
Thank you.
Convention Center, again, no major changes for this particular facility. Healthy increase in revenues that are its own revenues as well as expenses. We are showing change items for major event of $100,000 in the Convention Center budget, as well as $650,000 for Meet Minneapolis, especially to take advantage of our new audiences with the Super Bowl. And don't worry, I'm not going to spend any time on the internal service funds other than just to say, I know, I'm sorry, but just to say that
Just when we were having fun.
there are minimal changes to the internal service funds. Lastly, I just want to cover capital. It's an important part of our budget. And I just want to highlight a couple of things.
Council President Johnson has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ruff, on the drawing of $8 million from the self-insurance fund balance for neighborhood parks and streets plan. Earlier in the presentation, you said that if I remember right, 0.7 of the 5.5 is attributable to the Parks and Streets plan. Is this in, how do I want to say it?
I think I know where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, we're taking
Council President.
it out of an enterprise fund versus the general fund. So, I mean, I know this was part of our plan, don't get me wrong. But
No,
yeah.
it's always helpful to refresh your memory because I have to go back and refresh my memory periodically about what are all the nuances of this. So over the first 4 years of that plan, so starting in 2017 through 2020, we had anticipated drawing cash down from a number of different sources.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we had some come out of the Convention Center last year, the Common Bond Fund, for example, as well. And that was close to $30 million. And then when the consolidated TIF district goes away, then in 2021, we are going to show a much higher increase in the levy because we're going to have more tax base associated with it. And so really the purpose of the cash was to help carry us on this program in the early years until we could get to that larger levy increase when that TIF district went away. And so that was the connection between the two. So the 0.7 is steady until just that 1 year, and then it blips up higher, and then it goes back down to 0.7. So the cash need would go away at that point in time.
Okay, thank you, very helpful.
Sure.
Mr. Ruff, when you said that when the tax rate goes broader, doesn't the rate go down? You said it goes up? The base gets bigger.
The levy will go up, the rate will go down.
Thank you.
Correct. Yes, because we have a broader tax base at that point in time. You mentioned about the overall bond obligations. I just want to mention one thing about the downtown office building. This has been long-standing effort for the city. we've just hired the architects for this, and today was their first day in town actually starting on the detailed work for the downtown office building. We're not funding that particular building, as been discussed before, from net debt bonds. Again, we're funding that from savings from other leases that we are currently utilizing for other spaces. We are funding it then when the library bond debt service goes away, then we replace it with the downtown office building levy as well. And so it's not really in competition, and even the dollars aren't exactly known. So we would anticipate in December, we'll be coming back to the council with more details on the cost, on the size of the building. And then in 2018, the council will start awarding bids, and we'll issue bonds, but we'll essentially capitalize or pay out of cash and bonds for the first few years of the expenses until the library debt service goes away, and then we replace the debt service of the library bonds with these bonds. So we acknowledge that, I think, with CLIC up front, early in the process. I just wanted to revisit that with the Board of Estimate and Taxation in case you get questions about, well, how are we paying for this building and why is it not part of the capital budget? There's a detail here in terms of the breakdown of the mayor's recommendation on our capital budget, and this is by category, and you can see that it's going up by just over $5 million from 2017. Much of that is the Parks and Streets increase. Major projects associated with funding in 2018.
Oh, yes. Go ahead, Council President Johnson.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I apologize, Mr. Rupp, but in the building commission, is the mayor's recommendation higher than what CLIC's recommendation is for the capital?
This is the mayor's recommendation for the...
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that higher than what CLIC recommended?
Yes, it is.
Is it? Okay, so
It is.
take care of
It is not as high as what was...
elevators or what
It is not as high as what was requested.
What was requested. Okay, so we'll talk
by
about
the
that.
building commission.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks.
And does that cover the elevators?
Well, it wasn't. We weren't specific in what the dollars go for. I mean, if there's lower amounts, then the NBC will have to prioritize what those dollars are.
Yes, Jack.
There is a large amount of bonds that have been already authorized for elevators in the past, that a lot of which have been already issued that the building commission has yet to draw down.
So I think if we discuss in terms of just the higher level of major projects, Fire Station 1 is a continued need. If you remember, that's that fire station just a few blocks from City Hall. We do have funding there. It will be a several-year project, but we do have initial funding in 2018. The Hiawatha campus expansion is also a longstanding project for expanding our public works facility there. The public safety radio system continues to be investments that we make over a period of time. There is the solid waste portion of the East Side storage and maintenance facility, but there's also a transportation and maintenance repair that was not funded in this particular budget. There are additional pedestrian safety programs within this budget that I'm sure you'll hear about from Public Works, and as well as improvements up for the water campus for replacing our water filtration.
We had an excellent presentation on that earlier as a board. We really appreciated that.
And the impound lot project as well.
Thank you.
So here's a breakdown of those capital items.
Yep.
By department, as well as more details on the 5 years. The fact that our debt has been going down by a longer period of time.
Ms. Becker has a question.
Yep.
I'm not seeing the increase in street funding, but maybe I'm just missing it. When we did the parks package, there was also funding for streets, and I'm not seeing a like $30 million bump here, but maybe I'm missing it somewhere.
So the initial increase would have occurred in 2017.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say that we worked closely with Public Works. I mean, we can't fund exactly $22 million a year in street projects, so you will see some fluctuations, and you can see those in the 5-year projections. But we worked very hard to make sure that over a 5 to 6 year period, we are still averaging that $22 million for the streets. And the parks are the only budgets request for capital that they submitted was the amount for the $8 million plus the base amount as well for the Parks and Streets program. So that is fully funded as well.
Does that mean that the park did not submit non-city capital? Or
I think what I mean by that is
Okay.
that the park board submitted the projects that it had identified. It didn't submit twice as many projects as it
Oh,
would have
yes.
could be funded. So the capital assets request system that I mentioned earlier is included here, and just a delineation of by department where that money will be going. Last thing is the 5-year financial direction. It's an important part of the long-term planning, what's going to happen with our levy, and you can see in 2021 that increase in the levy is associated with that TIFT certification that we just discussed earlier. Otherwise, in the neighborhood of 4.75 up to 5.5%. And there's the calendar, and mercifully, I have ended my presentation.
Any further questions?
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. This was extremely helpful. It would have been more helpful to have August 15th, but I appreciate that's not your choice. But it's an extremely good presentation and very detailed, and I appreciate it. And thank you to the staff who worked very hard. I've done this job before, and I understand how difficult and how much work this is, so thank you.
Directions to staff. Oh,
If I could.
yes, please, John.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Just a quick highlight for members and anybody who may be watching. The website address that Mr. Ruff referenced earlier, I think it's a fantastic tool in step towards transparency as well as cleaning a lot of information up. So again, thanks to Finance, City Clerk, and IT to put that up so quickly. The address is budget.minneapolismn.gov, and that's where you'll see in the past archives of budgets, this current archives, the calendar, and as the Ways and Means Committee and the Budget Committee subcommittee takes up the entire budget, that calendar is sketched out there as well as the complete budget.
And the
book that's
address one
online.
more time is?
budget.minneapolismn.gov. But it has the full budget book, 482 pages of light reading.
The cure for insomnia. Jack, and then I'll come back to you, Ms. Becker.
Staff will take a direction prepare the draft proposals for the next meeting based on the budget for the mayor's levies requested. So I'll have those at the next meeting in draft form.
Vice President Becker.
The city charter requires that a budget be presented by the mayor by August 15th. The mayor presented a document that was 8 pages long. I didn't feel that this served our needs publicly. I did take this to the court. I lost. The judge said that that document met the minimum requirements by law. But I don't think that we should just be living by the minimum requirements. And I think just because it's legal doesn't make it right. And so we should have had these kind of documents earlier in the process, and I will be working with the public to ensure that in the future that happens, because these are the foundations of our discussion, our debate, what our city is going to be, what our government's going to be, what our lives are going to be like, and we need to foster public debate and public conversation around them. I appreciate the staff very much for putting these things together, but we will serve us much better if it happens earlier in the process, and I look forward to working with the public to make that happen.
And before election day.
Thank you.
Are there further comments or direction? Or all I want to say is I'm really grateful that this body unanimously chose to extend the public hearing for 2 more weeks. So in fact, the public will have an opportunity when they go to that wonderful website at budget. You will have the opportunity to read that almost 500-page document and come with questions and input. And we're grateful that we had a person giving us input today, and there will be an opportunity for other people. We're holding this hearing open, and we believe in transparency. We believe it's important we hear from the public. We want to hear from the public. We're grateful for the staff, and we, working together, will set a maximum tax levy in 2 weeks, and then the whole process of the real budget review begins with the council, and there will be more opportunities for people to have input, and they don't have to spend the levy maximum we set. They could actually spend a little bit less if they choose to do that, as they have in the past. Anyway, grateful for the public paying attention to this, for our good staff, and our opportunity to have lots of input and transparency. Thank you for being here tonight, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made, a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.